Hi everyone. Welcome to the channel. If you enjoy our stories, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Your support means a lot and helps the channel continue to grow. Now, let's begin today's story. My name is Dana. I'm 28, and on the worst Tuesday of my professional life, I walked out of a conference room without a job. 40 minutes later, my landlord called and said, "I need you out by Friday." I thought he was reacting to rumors about the layoff until his voice dropped. "Your parents offered me $1,000 to terminate your lease immediately." I called my mother first. She laughed. "You have to fall before you can change." My father took the phone and added, "Sleeping outside will teach you." They didn't ask whether I had savings. They didn't ask whether I had somewhere safe to go. They had already decided that humiliation was a lesson and my home was the classroom. I hung up before either of them could hear my breathing change. Then my landlord sent me a screenshot of the payment confirmation. That was their mistake. The money had not come from a personal account. It came from an account they had no right to use for a private family punishment. I stared at the company name on the transfer, opened my contacts, and called the one person my parents had spent years keeping away from every important decision. I explained what happened in less than 30 seconds. The answer was calm. "Forward me everything. Do not warn them." 1 minute later, my mother called 6 times. 3 minutes later, my father finally got through and shouted, "What did you do?" I looked at the eviction message on my screen and said, "The same thing you taught me to do." I protected myself. They still had no idea how much that single call was about to cost them. Before I tell you who answered and why my parents panicked so quickly, tell me what time it is where you are, where you're watching from, and what the weather is like there. Does it match your mood today? I'm curious to see how far this story travels. My landlord's name was Gary. I had rented from him for 4 years, paid on time, and still had 7 months left on my lease. When I demanded a written reason for forcing me out, he refused. I stayed quiet until the silence made him nervous. Finally, he admitted my parents had called before I had even cleared my desk. They said losing my job was not enough of a consequence. They wanted me frightened, desperate, and ready to return home under their rules. They offered him $1,000 and promised to cover any trouble if I resisted. Gary insisted he had not deposited the money. It was an electronic transfer, he said, and he could send it back. I told him to send proof. He refused until I reminded him that he had just threatened to remove a tenant with a valid lease because 2 outsiders paid him. A screenshot arrived 30 seconds later. The transfer description read, "Consulting retainer." The sender was Hale Family Property Group. My parents, David and Susan, managed that company. It owned rental homes throughout the county and advertised itself as an ethical, family-centered business. My father gave talks about personal responsibility. My mother published newsletters about stable communities. Yet, they had used company money to purchase control over my private home, then disguised the payment as consulting work. What they seemed to forget was that the company did not belong entirely to them. It had begun with my grandmother, Evelyn, and after her death, ownership passed into a family trust. My parents controlled daily operations, but my Aunt Margaret held the largest voting share and served as trustee. She lived far away and rarely attended family gatherings. My parents called her cold, suspicious, and obsessed with paperwork. Their favorite warning was, "Never involve Margaret in family business." Years earlier, I had worked one summer in the company office. I watched Margaret question missing receipts while my father joked that she worried too much. After one tense meeting, she gave me her direct number. "You notice what people try not to see," she said. "Call me if the numbers ever stop matching the story, before using that number." I called my older sister, Emily. I wanted to believe she knew nothing. She answered brightly and said, I heard you're finally getting the reset you need. Her words sounded rehearsed. When I asked about the payment, she went quiet, then said, "It's company money. It's not like they emptied your account." That sentence told me she knew everything. 2 years earlier, I had helped pay Emily's certification fees when she was between jobs. When I reminded her, she laughed. That was different. I had a plan. I asked whether she had suggested contacting Gary. She accused me of being dramatic and said a little fear might make me more ambitious. I ended the call and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the screenshot. This was not the first time my parents had called cruelty tough love. At 13, after one bad test. My father removed my bedroom door because privacy was supposedly a privilege. When I changed my college major, my mother called relatives and described me as unstable. When Emily needed help, it was family support. When I needed help, it was weakness. But this time, they had left a trail. The false payment label mattered. The company account mattered. The valid lease mattered. They expected me to panic, beg, and return to them. Instead, I called Jake, my closest friend. His first response was imperfect. Maybe they think they're helping. But then he stopped himself. No, paying your landlord crosses every line. He told me to save the screenshot in several places, download my lease, and write down every detail while it was fresh. Then he asked, "Who can freeze this before they rewrite the story?" I looked at Margaret's number. For years, my parents had controlled every conflict by keeping it inside the family where they could decide what was true. I pressed call and waited. Margaret answered on the second ring. "Dana," she said. "This is unexpected." I told her I had lost my job, but I did not pause for sympathy. I described Gary's demand, my parents' offer, and the transfer from Hale Family Property Group. I forwarded the screenshot while speaking. She went silent long enough for me to hear my own pulse. "Do you have the lease and his messages?" she asked. "Yes." "Did the board approve a consulting contract with this landlord?" "No, he is not a consultant." "Forward everything. Do not warn your parents. Do not threaten the landlord. I am suspending access to the discretionary account and sending a preservation notice." I asked how she could act so quickly. "I am the trustee and majority voting member," she replied. "I can stop an unauthorized payment before someone manufactures a reason for it." My phone began vibrating. My mother called once, twice, then 6 times. Margaret explained that the account access had been frozen and company counsel had instructed everyone involved to preserve records. 3 minutes later, my father called. A message appeared. "Answer me now." Margaret told me I could answer if I put the call on speaker and announced that she was present. I accepted. "What did you do?" My father shouted. "I reported an unauthorized company payment to the trustee." "You called Margaret." His anger cracked into alarm. My mother's voice rose behind him. "Dana, this is a family matter. You had no right to involve the business." "The business paid my landlord," I said. "You involved it first." My father accused me of calling them thieves over $1,000. Margaret interrupted calmly. "No one has accused you of theft. I am reviewing an expense labeled as a consulting retainer. Provide the contract, invoice, business purpose, and approval by 5 o'clock. He claimed they were helping me learn responsibility. Then you used the wrong account, the wrong description, and the wrong method. Margaret said, "Do not contact the landlord again. Do not pressure Dana to surrender her lease." My mother said I had become dependent and needed intervention, for the first time. Someone separated that accusation from the actual issue. Her employment status has nothing to do with whether company funds were misrepresented. Margaret replied, My father threatened an emergency board meeting. Margaret welcomed the request after he produced the records. Then she ended the call. The apartment looked the same, but the balance of power had changed. My parents had always defined every disagreement. If I protested, I was emotional. If I asked questions, I was disrespectful. If I involved anyone else, I was betraying the family. Their real advantage had never been wisdom. It had been isolation. Jake arrived with groceries, chargers, and a legal pad. Instead of telling me what to do, he asked what I needed. We created a timeline. I had been laid off at 9:12. I called my parents at 9:47. Gary contacted me at 10:18. That meant my parents had reached him almost immediately. They had not spent hours worrying. They had moved directly from hearing bad news to executing punishment. That afternoon, a tenant attorney named Rachel Moreno called me. She explained that a landlord generally could not erase a fixed-term lease without legal or contractual grounds. Accepting money from outsiders to remove a lawful tenant could create serious liability. She told me to communicate only in writing and asked Gary to confirm whether he intended to honor my lease. Within an hour, Gary emailed that his earlier demand had been premature and that no eviction action would proceed. It was not an apology. It was fear dressed as professional language. Rachel warned me that stopping the eviction was only the first battle. My parents might call the transfer a misunderstanding. Gary might minimize his role. Emily might deny knowing anything. Evidence mattered more than anger. Then Margaret requested an independent audit. She had already found that the consulting retainer had no contract, no invoice, and no board approval. When she searched older records, she saw personal trips described as site visits, family dinners labeled tenant outreach, and expenses connected to Emily hidden inside marketing accounts. I remembered seeing similar entries during my summer in the office. My father had told me bookkeeping was too complicated for me to understand. That evening, Margaret sent one sentence. The numbers have not matched the story for a long time. My parents had tried to purchase my eviction for $1,000. Before sunset, that payment had triggered a review of years of company spending. The next morning, my parents began rewriting history. My mother emailed Margaret that the money was a temporary relocation incentive intended to protect me from future rent. My father produced a one-page consulting agreement describing Gary as an advisor on tenant resilience. The signature line was blank, and the file metadata showed it had been created after Margaret demanded proof. They had manufactured an explanation after getting caught. My father called from another number. "You're destroying the company your grandmother built." He said no. "You used it to punish me." He warned that Margaret was using me to seize control. For a moment, doubt surfaced. My parents had spent years telling us that every relative had hidden motives. Then I looked at the false label, the new document, and the eviction message. Facts did not become less true because exposing them might shift power. He ended by saying, "You won't last a month without us." That sentence stayed with me because part of it might become true. I had limited savings, 2 weeks of severance, and no job. Winning the lease dispute would not rebuild my life. I could not make revenge my only plan or let my parents remain the center of every decision. Jake and I divided the crisis into 4 areas: housing, legal protection, employment, and money. Rachel secured written confirmation that my lease remained active. I reduced expenses and calculated how long I could pay rent. Then I contacted former colleagues and clients. Asking for help felt humiliating because my parents had trained me to treat need as failure. Jake challenged that. "You aren't asking anyone to carry you. He said you're letting them know you're available." My first interview went badly. When the hiring manager asked how I handled conflict, I remembered my father yelling and lost my train of thought. The interview ended early. I walked outside convinced that my parents had been right about me. Jake did not offer false praise. That one hurt. He said, "Learn what you can and let the rest belong to today." While I searched for work, the audit uncovered a wider pattern. Over several years, my parents had used company funds for personal travel, home improvements, Emily's professional memberships, and family events. Some expenses might have had business elements, but approvals were missing, and descriptions were vague. Money had also moved from maintenance reserves into discretionary accounts without proper authorization. Emily called after her company credit card stopped working. I had not known she possessed one. She accused me of ruining her certification renewal. I asked whether she was an employee. She claimed she helped with branding, but the auditor found no contract, payroll record, or documented project. Then she revealed the plan. My parents had not admitted. They were going to let you stay at the lake house once you apologized. The lake house belonged to the company. My parents intended to force me out of my legal apartment, make me believe I had nowhere to go, and then offer controlled housing if I submitted to their rules. They wanted to create the emergency and present themselves as the rescue. "Thank you," I said. "For what?" "For explaining the plan." I documented her words. Rachel also demanded Gary's messages with my family, facing his own exposure. He handed them over. My mother had written, "She will panic, but do not back down." My father wrote, "Once she has nowhere else, she will come home and listen." Emily reacted with a thumbs up and asked whether the lake house should remain unavailable until I apologized. For years, I had wondered whether their version of love was simply difficult for me to understand. The messages made the answer clearer. They might have felt love, but they used fear and access to make it conditional. A feeling did not excuse a method. Margaret asked whether I wanted all the messages sent to the board. My first instinct was to expose everything. Rachel asked what I wanted most: protection, accountability, or humiliation. I admitted I wanted all three. Humiliation is the least controllable. She said protection and accountability can be documented. I submitted only the evidence relevant to the company payment and my lease. I did not post it online or send it through the family. That restraint would matter later. The emergency board meeting was set for Friday, the night before. My mother left a soft voicemail saying families made mistakes. In the final sentence, she asked me to tell Margaret the payment had been my idea. I saved the recording in 3 places. I joined the board meeting by video from Jake's apartment. On screen were Margaret, 2 independent directors, company counsel, the auditor, my parents, and Emily. My father wore the expression he used when he wanted confidence to substitute for proof. My mother held a folder labeled Family Resolution. Margaret stated the purpose plainly: unauthorized spending, a false expense description, and interference with a tenant's lease. She referred to me not as their daughter, but as the affected tenant. That distinction removed the emotional fog. My father described the $1,000 as compassionate assistance. He claimed Gary misunderstood. My mother presented a proposed family support agreement requiring me to move into the lake house, attend financial coaching with my father, submit job applications for approval, and repay housing costs later. She offered it as proof they intended to help. One director asked when the agreement had been created. My mother said after my layoff. The metadata showed it was 3 weeks old. That was the twist even I had not expected. My parents had prepared terms for controlling my housing before I lost my job. They knew my company was considering restructuring because Emily had heard confidential rumors through someone in recruiting. A recovered message from her said, "Dana's department may get cut. This could be our chance to force a reset." My mother replied, "Start thinking about housing pressure. Your father will handle the landlord." The board went silent. My parents had not reacted badly to sudden news. They had waited for a vulnerable moment. My father turned toward Emily and snapped. "Why did you keep that message in one sentence?" He abandoned the daughter who had helped him. Emily stared at him as if she had just learned that favoritism was not loyalty. It was usefulness. Margaret asked for my statement. I said I was not asking the company to solve my unemployment or punish anyone for being unkind. I was asking it to address a company account used to create a private housing crisis, a false label used to hide the payment, and a plan that treated business assets as tools of family control. Then I played my mother's voicemail asking me to claim the payment had been my idea. My father leaned back. My mother closed her eyes. The auditor presented preliminary findings: unsupported reimbursements, personal expenses, and money removed from maintenance reserves without required approval. One transfer had delayed roof repairs after tenants reported leaks. Their entitlement had affected more people than me. During a short recess, my father texted, "Stop this now and we can still be a family." I replied, "Family was not supposed to require my silence." When the meeting resumed, the board suspended my parents' management and financial authority pending completion of the audit. Emily's access ended immediately. An outside manager was appointed to protect tenants, accounts, and records. The board also authorized efforts to recover unsupported personal expenses. My father shouted that Margaret had staged a coup. My mother began crying, but her first question was, "What are we supposed to tell people?" Even then, reputation mattered more than repair. The meeting ended without a final repayment number. But their immediate control was gone. They could no longer move money, pressure employees, or use company properties as rewards for obedience. 2 hours later, Gary asked to settle. His first proposal offered written confirmation of my lease and reimbursement for some legal costs. Rachel rejected it. She required a formal statement that I had never defaulted, payment of my documented expenses, rent credit, a renewal option with a cap increase, and landlord law training from an independent provider. He agreed after several days. The man who tried to convert my home into a transaction now had to sign terms protecting my teenie. That same afternoon, the marketing firm from my failed interview rejected me. For a moment, the old story rushed back. Unemployed, unstable, unable to survive without my parents. Then a former client named Noir emailed. I had contacted her earlier in the week. She needed a contract strategist for 3 months and asked whether I could begin Monday. The pay was slightly below my old salary, and the job was temporary. It was not a magical rescue. It was work I had earned through a professional relationship built before the crisis. I accepted. Jake and I celebrated with takeout on my apartment floor, surrounded by boxes I no longer had to pack. Emily messaged me. "Dad says, 'This is your fault. Mom won't stop crying. Margaret ruined everything. Are you proud?' I typed several angry answers, deleted them, and wrote, 'I'm proud that I stopped cooperating with something wrong.' She did not respond. Over the next month, the audit became harder for my parents to dismiss. Company records showed personal travel, renovations, private events, and expenses for Emily hidden behind vague business labels. The board's lawyers began calculating repayment. Industry invitations were withdrawn because my parents no longer represented the company. The image they had protected so fiercely began collapsing under records they had created themselves. My mother called from an unknown number and said, "You took my reputation. You built it on a story that wasn't true." I replied, "We never would have let you become homeless. You needed me to believe I would." She had no answer. That silence gave me the clearest definition of their plan. They had wanted fear, not failure. They intended to hold the rescue until I surrendered. The full audit arrived 6 weeks later. It identified more than $200,000 in unsupported or improperly approved personal expenses across 8 years. Not every item was recoverable, and some could be reclassified if valid records appeared. But the pattern was undeniable. The board permanently removed my parents from management, canceled salaries and benefits tied to their positions, and demanded substantial repayment. They retained minority ownership, but lost the expense accounts, vehicles, and authority that had supported their public image. An outside manager restored money to maintenance reserves and opened a complaint process for tenants. Problems my father had dismissed were finally addressed. The company began behaving like the ethical business my parents had advertised. Rachel proposed a separate resolution for my case. My parents would reimburse costs not covered by Gary, sign a non-interference agreement, stop contacting my employers and landlords, and acknowledge that I had never requested the payment. In exchange, I would not pursue further civil claims unless they violated the agreement. My father refused because signing would make him look guilty. Then the board's repayment demand placed pressure on their finances to meet part of it. They sold the lake house, the same property they planned to offer me only after I apologized. The symbol of their control became part of the money used to repair the damage. They signed 2 days before Rachel planned to file. The agreement barred them from interfering with my housing or work, making transactions in my name, or claiming publicly that I had requested the eviction. It also contained a written acknowledgement that they had initiated the payment to pressure me to leave my apartment. It was not an apology, but it was the truth they could no longer rewrite. Emily faced consequences. 2. Her recruiting firm reviewed how she obtained and shared the restructuring rumor. She was placed on leave and later resigned. She called me furious. "You destroyed my career," she said. "You passed confidential information so they could plan how to corner me. I didn't think they would really do it. You reacted to the plan with a thumbs up." She became quiet, then admitted, "They always said you thought you were better than us." I wanted them to see I was loyal. For the first time, I understood her role without excusing it. My parents rewarded her when she served their narrative and blamed her the moment her messages became evidence. Favoritism had made her feel safe, but only while she remained useful. "I hope you learn who you are when loyalty isn't obedience," I said. "I can't do that work for you." I blocked her for 30 days. My father sent letters about sacrifice and gratitude. None included the words, "I was wrong." He told relatives I had manipulated Margaret to gain control of the company. That rumor failed when Margaret issued a formal statement that I would receive no ownership, payment, or job from the audit. I had asked for none. My father could not imagine action without personal gain, so he invented one. My mother's final message before the agreement took effect said, "We did what we thought was best." I replied, "Believing something is best does not remove responsibility for what it does." Then I stopped responding. My contract job was demanding. During the first month, stress caused me to miss a minor deadline. I expected humiliation, nor my manager, asked for a recovery plan. I gave her one, corrected the problem, and moved forward. That experience taught me more about responsibility than my father's speeches. Real accountability required truth, repair, and changed behavior, not manufactured disaster. At the end of 3 months, Noor offered me a permanent role-leading client strategy. The salary matched my former job and the terms were better. I negotiated before accepting. That detail mattered. I was not grabbing the first rescue offered from fear. I was reviewing, asking, and choosing. The night I signed, I stood beside my apartment door. Months earlier, my parents had treated it as a lever they could pull. Now it was simply mine to open or close. I still did not feel triumphant every day. Some mornings, I missed the family I believed I had. Some nights I replayed the calls and wondered whether I could have handled things privately. Then I remembered that privacy was exactly what had protected them. They had counted on my shame more than they counted on Gary's cooperation. Their punishment had not made me stronger. Stopping it had. Part 7. The Home I Chose. 6 months after the layoff. Margaret invited me to the company's annual meeting. I declined the formal appearance, but met her for coffee afterward. She told me repairs were underway. Financial controls had been rewritten, and tenants could report problems without going through my parents. The company had recovered enough money to restore its reserves. My parents remained owners on paper, but had no operational authority. Their repayment plan would continue for years. "Do you regret calling me?" Margaret asked. I considered the cost. My relationship with my parents had become a legal boundary. Emily and I had barely spoken. Extended relatives had chosen sides. There was no version of justice that restored the family I thought existed. "No." I said I regret that calling you was necessary. She nodded. That is usually how accountability feels. I asked why she had given me her number years earlier. She said, "My grandmother once warned that family businesses fail when relatives confuse access with ownership and affection with permission." Margaret had suspected blurred lines for years, but explanations always arrived before proof. The payment to Gary was different. A false label, a private purpose, a cooperative witness, and a direct victim willing to speak. "You didn't ruin them," she said. "You interrupted them." My parents did not become homeless or disappear. Their consequences were serious, not theatrical. They moved from their large house into a smaller townhouse. My father took consulting work that required real invoices and outside approval. My mother stopped speaking at industry events. Emily later found work outside recruiting after completing an ethics course. Their lives continued, but without the authority and image that once protected them from questions. 3 months after signing the agreement, my mother emailed asking to meet. She followed the rules and did not pressure me. So I agreed to 30 minutes in a public cafe. At first, she talked about the embarrassment, the audit, and the house. I waited. Finally, she said I was wrong to call Gary. It was the first direct acceptance of responsibility I had heard from her. She admitted the family support agreement had been prepared before my layoff. She admitted they planned to make me believe I had nowhere to go, then offer the lake house only if I accepted their conditions. Why, I asked. "Because you were making choices without us," she said. "Your father thought you were drifting too far away. There it was. They had not feared my failure. They had feared my independence. I told her I was not ready for a normal relationship and might never be. An apology without consistent change would not reopen my life." She cried, but she did not argue. When our time ended, she asked permission to email again in a month. I said yes. My father took a different path. He mailed me a copy of the signed agreement with a note, "You won." I returned it with my own. This was never a contest. I wanted you to stop. He did not contact me again. Some people expected me to publish every message, take over the company, or celebrate each loss. I did none of those things. I kept my apartment, recovered my costs, secured my work, protected my name, and forced the people who used money as a weapon to repay what they misused. Their authority ended. Their actions became records they could not rewrite. That was enough. On the first anniversary of my layoff, I renewed my lease. I read every clause, asked Rachel one question, and signed. Then I hung the keys on the brass hook beside my door. A year earlier, I thought losing my job meant losing proof that I was capable. My parents tried to turn that fear into obedience. Their plan showed me where my power had actually been hiding in documents, boundaries, witnesses, and the willingness to seek help before panic became surrender. Jake remained my friend, not my savior. We disagreed. He told me when I was becoming consumed by the audit, and I told him when his advice sounded too simple. He did not replace my family. He helped me recognize relationships where support did not require submission, nor later promoted me to train younger strategists. The lesson I repeated most was simple. Mistakes are information, not identity. People grow through truth tools and room to repair, not when someone manufactures a crisis and calls it love. Emily eventually emailed. I helped them corner you because being useful to them made me feel safe. I'm sorry. I waited 2 weeks before replying. I thanked her for being honest and agreed to occasional emails. Nothing more. It was not reconciliation. It was one unlocked window in a house whose doors remained closed. My mother kept writing monthly. I ignored defensive messages and acknowledged accountable ones. Slowly. She learned that access was not guaranteed by title. It was built through consistency. My father chose silence, and I stopped interpreting that silence as punishment from someone who had used words to control me. It felt like peace. The $1,000 was never really about rent. It was the price my parents paid to purchase fear. They believed fear would bring me home. Instead, it triggered an audit, exposed years of misconduct, ended their control of the company, forced repayment, cost them the lake house, damaged the reputation they valued, and placed permanent limits around their access to my life. They said I had to fall before I could change. They were right about one thing. I changed. I stopped confusing cruelty with discipline. I stopped treating secrecy as loyalty. I stopped waiting for the people who hurt me to agree that I had been hurt. Most importantly, I learned that protecting yourself is not revenge simply because those who lose power call it betrayal. The morning I lost my job, I thought my life had been reduced to one terrible call. By noon, I made another. That call did not save me by magic. It gave the truth somewhere to go. Everything afterward, organizing evidence, facing the board, rebuilding my income, and enforcing boundaries, was work I still had to do. The morning after everything fell apart, I woke up expecting to feel victorious. After all, the truth was finally out. My parents' secret payment to my landlord had been exposed. The lies had unraveled. The pressure they had spent months placing on me had collapsed under its own weight. But victory was not what I felt. Instead, I felt exhausted. There is a strange emptiness that comes after a long battle ends. For so long. Every day had been about surviving, defending myself, proving that I wasn't crazy, proving that what happened to me was real. Then suddenly there was nothing left to fight. I sat alone in my apartment, staring through the window as people walked by outside, each carrying their own worries, their own secrets, their own disappointments. For the first time in a very long time, I allowed myself to stop thinking about what my parents wanted, what my relatives believed, or what everyone else expected from me. Instead, I asked myself a question I had avoided for years. What kind of life do I want now? It sounds like a simple question, but for someone who spent most of his life trying to earn approval, it felt almost impossible to answer. My entire identity had been built around keeping other people happy. I had spent years convincing myself that sacrifice was the price of love. If my parents needed something, I gave it. If they crossed a boundary, I stayed quiet. If they hurt me, I found excuses for them. Every time I swallowed my own pain, I called it loyalty. Every time I abandoned my own needs, I called it respect. But sitting there that morning, I finally understood something that should have been obvious all along. Respect that only travels in one direction is not respect. Love that requires suffering is not love, and loyalty that demands self-destruction is not loyalty at all. A week later, my father called. His voice sounded different, less confident, less certain. The anger that had fueled him for months seemed to have burned itself out. He asked if we could meet. I agreed, not because I owed him anything, but because I wanted to hear what he had to say. We met at a small diner halfway between our homes, the kind of place where nobody pays attention to anyone else's conversation. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, my father sighed and rubbed his hands together. "I don't understand how things got this bad," he said. I looked at him carefully. For years, I would have rushed to comfort him. I would have reassured him that none of this was his fault. This time I simply answered honestly, because nobody listened when I said I was hurting. He looked down at the table. We were trying to help. I nodded slowly. Maybe, but helping someone isn't deciding what's best for them while ignoring what they tell you. He didn't argue. That surprised me. My father always argued. He always had an explanation. Always had a reason. But this time he sat quietly, staring into his coffee. Eventually, he said something I never expected to hear. "I thought making life harder for you would force you to become stronger." I let those words hang in the air between us. Then I answered, "No, it just taught me I couldn't trust the people who were supposed to protect me." The pain that crossed his face lasted only a second, but I saw it, for the first time. I think he truly understood the damage. Not all of it. Maybe not even most of it. But enough. Enough to realize that intentions don't erase consequences. Enough to realize that love can hurt people when it becomes controlling. Enough to realize that family is not automatically right simply because they are family. The conversation lasted almost 3 hours. There were no dramatic apologies, no tears, no miraculous reconciliation. Real life rarely works that way. Instead, there were small moments of honesty, small acknowledgments, small pieces of truth that had been buried for years. When we finally stood to leave, my father looked older than I remembered before walking away. He stopped and said quietly, "I should have trusted you more." It wasn't everything I deserved to hear, but it was real. And sometimes real matters more than perfect. Months passed, slowly. My life began to stabilize. I found better work. I made new friends. I built routines that had nothing to do with managing other people's emotions. The more distance I gained from the situation, the clearer everything became. I started noticing how often people confuse control with care, how often they call manipulation concern, how often they disguise guilt as responsibility. Most importantly, I realized how many people spend their entire lives waiting for permission to prioritize themselves. I had been one of them. For years, I believed my worth depended on being useful. I believed I had to earn love by making myself smaller. I believed setting boundaries was selfish. I believed saying no made me a bad son. The truth was exactly the opposite. Boundaries didn't destroy relationships. They revealed which relationships were healthy enough to survive honesty. One afternoon, nearly a year after everything happened, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was instantly familiar. My mother's. Inside was a single page. No dramatic speeches, no lengthy explanations. Just a short note. She wrote that she had spent months thinking about everything that happened. She admitted she had often chosen peace over truth because conflict made her uncomfortable. She admitted she had stayed silent when she should have spoken up. And at the very bottom, she wrote 6 words that I had waited years to hear. "I am sorry for my part." I sat there for a long time staring at those words. Not because they magically healed every wound. They didn't. Some damage takes years to repair. Some scars never completely disappear. But the apology mattered because it was honest. It wasn't designed to excuse the past. It wasn't filled with conditions. It simply acknowledged reality. And sometimes acknowledgement is where healing begins. Looking back now, I no longer think the most important part of this story was the $1,000 my parents secretly paid to have me evicted. It wasn't the arguments. It wasn't the betrayal. It wasn't even the moment the truth finally came out. The most important part was what happened afterward. The moment I stopped measuring my value through other people's approval. The moment I stopped apologizing for my own pain. The moment I realized that protecting my peace did not make me cruel. It made me healthy. Because the truth is, some people will only love the version of you that stays silent. They will praise your patience as long as it benefits them. They will call you kind as long as your kindness costs them nothing. But the moment you speak up, the moment you establish boundaries, the moment you refuse to carry burdens that were never yours, they may call you selfish, difficult, or ungrateful. Let them. Their disappointment is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to live a life you can respect when you look in the mirror, years from now. I doubt anyone will remember the exact amount of money involved. They won't remember every argument or every accusation. But I will remember the lesson. I will remember the day I stopped asking permission to defend my own life. I will remember the day I realized that being someone's child does not mean becoming their property. I will remember the day I finally chose myself. And that decision changed everything. It gave me peace. It gave me freedom. Most of all, it gave me back the one thing I had almost lost while trying to please everyone else myself. In the end, my parents' $1,000 lesson became the most expensive mistake they ever made, not because of the money they lost, but because it forced every hidden truth into the light. And once the truth is exposed, it can never fully return to the shadows. The books were finally balanced. The lies were finished. The weight was gone. For the first time in years, I was no longer surviving. I was finally living. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment, reflection, and storytelling purposes. If this journey taught us anything, it is that love should never require silence. Family should never demand self-sacrifice without limits. And loyalty should never come at the cost of your own dignity. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is stop asking others for permission to protect their peace. If this story resonated with you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this to life. Until next time, remember, the people who truly care about you will never ask you to disappear so they can remain comfortable. Take care of yourself, stay strong, and we'll see you in the next story.